Our teams, Ukraine and the United States, are currently working on a bilateral security agreement, and we are already working on a specific text. Our goal is to make this agreement the strongest of all. We are discussing the specific foundations of our security and cooperation. We are also working on fixing specific levels of support for this year and for the next 10 years, including armed support, financial, political, and joint arms production.
Term to say won't change anything. As been pointed out by a number of people, including Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and others, Ukraine's real problem right now is a lack of manpower, and no amount of money is going to solve that issue. So, even if the equipment that has been earmarked, I think 13.8 billion of the 60.1 billion is for this military aid, military equipment. Even if all this equipment was released now and it rolled into the front lines now, there's no manpower to man it. The Ukrainians just don't have anybody trained up. They're retreating on the front line, not because they have a lack of will to fight, because there's no one left to fight. Brigades that are thrown in, suffer attrition, are supposed to be rotated out. With fresh brigades, can't be rotated out because there's no fresh brigades. When the Russians break through, brigades that are held in reserve or sent in to counterattack aren't available because they are in the front line elsewhere. And you end up yielding positions that otherwise would have been fought over for weeks. The Ukrainians are yielding them in a matter of days. So that's the reality, and there's nothing on the horizon right now that shows that Ukraine's going to be able to resolve this manpower issue anytime soon. There's a desperate need for mobilization taking place, but you don't recruit and train troops overnight. And you're also, Ukraine's behind the eight ball in the past when Ukraine has had to rebuild an army. They've done this several times now. They did it in May and June of 2022 when the bulk of the Ukrainian armed forces were destroyed or neutralized by the Russians during the initial phase of their special military operation. A lot of people are like, oh, the Ukrainians kicked the Russians, but actually the Russians killed a lot of Ukrainians and effectively destroyed their military. And then the Russians voluntarily withdrew from the positions around Kiev and elsewhere as part of a good faith effort to show the Ukrainians that they were serious about this Istanbul memorandum that they negotiated for peace, where they said we would leave territory. So Russians were leaving territory to show this good faith. But the Ukrainian army was destroyed. There were units that took 80% casualties that time. Offensive. The bulk of this army was destroyed during the battles of Bakhmut, where they threw forces in, and people were telling them, don't commit to Bakhmut, just give it to the Russians, don't waste your troops. Nope, they ground up 60,000 there. Then they ground up another 61,000 or so in their failed counterattack. A total of 160,000 troops were lost. And now they've got nothing left. There's nobody left to rebuild. There's no troops in training. There's nothing. There's no reservoir to draw upon. And yet the Russians now are putting more and more troops. The Russians have said that they've rebuilt, mobilized 2 combined arms armies and what they call the Dnieper River Flotilla, which is a division-sized force designed to secure the Dnieper River. These guys have already been recruited and trained. You have Colonel General Lapin re-emerging on the battlefield. He's a general that fought with great heroics early on in the fighting. He was relieved. Under a cloud, I guess he had a difference of opinion with General Surovikin. Sent back, went to the General Staff Academy. They deemed him to be fit for command, and they put him in charge of 100,000 Russians who are now appearing on the front line, ready to commit. This is an offensive-minded general. So the bottom line is the Ukrainians are on their back heels and backing up further. The second and third lines of defense have been penetrated by the Russians. The Ukrainians don't seem to have the ability to plug these gaps, and eventually, what's going to happen is they're going to have to make a precipitous withdrawal across because there are still cities that they're holding, towns they're holding in Donetsk that are strong points, heavily fortified, have been fortified for over a decade, and the Russians haven't made any progress there, and the Ukrainians are loath to give up these fortified positions because they think at a minimum they should force the Russians to pay a heavy price to take these. But as Russia penetrates the line and starts maneuvering around, these places run the risk of being surrounded, and then the Ukrainians will have no choice but to withdraw from that. And this is what we're starting to see as the Russians shape the battlefield. The equipment that they're going to get, some of it, everybody's talking about the ATACMS missile. Well, the ATACMS missile has been introduced to this battlefield since March. The Biden administration admits that without congressional approval, they went ahead and gave these missiles to the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians have been using them since March. And they continue to use them now with some success, but the Russians jam the GPS guidance system. The Russians shoot down the majority of the ATACMS that are shot. It's not a game-changing weapon. There's no such thing as a game-changing weapon. This 60.1 billion, but only 13.8 is for military assistance. The rest goes to other things, including getting the United States to rebuild equipment, and that's going to take over several years. A lot of this equipment isn't available right now. It has to be procured. It has to be assembled. It's going to unfold over a series of months, and Ukraine doesn't have months. They're running out of time now. And I think you're just going to see the battlefield continue to deteriorate to the detriment of the Ukrainian strategic posture. And there's nothing that Ukraine can do to stop that.